When it comes to Michigan football in 2025, obviously all eyes will be on Bryce Underwood at the quarterback position, whoever they end up getting or already do have at the wide receiver position, and the defense. But the engine that makes the Michigan football team run, well, it's the offensive line, actually. That's not what we're talking about today. Let's talk about the running backs room, because that, to me, is incredibly intriguing entering this season. Let's talk about it here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Borderline miraculous comeback in a lot of ways, voice mostly back, rib injury, just almost like spontaneously healed, praise Jesus. Locked On Wolverines podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. So I'm excited to delve deeper into the running back position because despite whatever Michigan does in the passing game and all of that, we still know that it's going to be, there's going to be balance, right? And you look at what Chip Lindsey has done over his tenure as an offensive coordinator, there's always a lot of balance. It's always like a 3,000 proposition. Certainly in year two of Bryce Underwood, I could expect that maybe to be closer to 4,000, 2,500 or something like that, because why wouldn't you pass the ball when you've got a quarterback like that? But especially this year, I think you're going to see a heavy dose of running the football. Obviously, it will be a little bit different because they've got quarterbacks that can get the ball downfield. Teams aren't going to be able to completely load up against the run. They'll learn very quickly. It's going to be kind of almost like what you saw in 2022 when it was like the Hawaii game. You know, J.J. McCarthy comes in, they load for bear to try to stop the run, and then the passing game takes off. And then everyone decided that they had to be a lot more balanced. And then you saw Blake Corum suddenly become the second coming of Barry Sanders and able to do the types of things that no one thought he could do the year before. With that in mind, I'm very excited to kind of see what the Michigan running backs room, how that's going to look this year, because obviously we saw a heavy dose of Jordan Marshall in the Reliant Quest Bowl against Alabama. Really incredible to see just what he was able to do. It took a little while for him to get going, of course, but he had some of those like big runs at the most important times. Now, was it like this like eye-opening, like incredible performance? I wouldn't go that far, right? It wasn't like he ran, like he busted out a couple 60-yarders or anything like that. It wasn't like Blake Corum bursting onto the scene in 2021. It wasn't like Donovan Edwards bursting onto the scene in 2022, but it was a solid performance against a very good defense, one that certainly thought it was going to be in the college football playoff. So to accumulate over 100 yards, it wasn't like a 35 carry 100-yard performance. I would look up the numbers, but again, we have a computer crashing issue that I haven't figured out whenever I open up CFB stats. So still, you saw some really good things from his ability to go out there and grind things out, right? Even when Alabama knew it was coming, especially late, right? Like no one didn't know that Michigan was going to run the ball at that point. With Alex Orji in, they weren't even attempting to pass the ball, and Jordan Marshall in crunch time got things done. But obviously, he's not the only one that comes in. I don't even know that Jordan Marshall is going to be the starter. I look at Justice Haynes entering year 3 from Alabama. Now, here's the thing about Justice Haynes. He's a high GPA kid as well, right? Like he is a culture fit in pretty much every way. He's been playing third fiddle to Jalen Milroe and then whoever else was the running back ahead of him. I don't really, to be honest, remember who the running back this year for Alabama was. Last year, I do remember, was Jace McClellan. So the fact that he was playing that second fiddle, but yet he's got that scoot, he's got that ability, he's got that Blake Corum in him. And I think that but I think it's a little bit more balanced too, right? With like the mixture of Jordan Marshall and what Justice Haynes brings to the table. I don't think it's necessarily going to be that obvious Blake Corum, Hassan Haskins pairing where it was, essentially that Sonic and Knuckles, Thunder and Lightning is what Michigan called it, of course. But I do think that you're going to find that both have different roles that they can play. Justice Haynes, I think, will be a big threat to catching the ball out of the backfield. I'm not saying Jordan Marshall won't be. I think he will be too. But Chip Lindsey and his offense, they really like to utilize that quarterback pass, that running back receiving game. I think quarterback pass. Yeah, an offense wants to run a quarterback pass play. Really, okay. I haven't killed all the stupidity within me with this virus. nonetheless, I think that it's just going to look really good now. I think that the ceiling has risen a little bit, and I think that there was a lot of potential with Khalil Mullings, Donovan Edwards. I don't think it was able to reach it in large part because I don't think there was a quarterback, and teams were able to just kind of, come up against it. Khalil Mullings certainly showcased some real big ability in the USC and the Ohio State games to be able to create something from nothing when in the most absolute necessary moments. We don't know that about Jordan Marshall just yet. Certainly Justice Haynes, who's really got one full year under his belt. I mean, he had his freshman year. He didn't play a heck of a lot, but he played a lot more this last year. And had a respectable, for a number 3 running back, had a really respectable, or I should say number 3 option. Number 2 running back, but the third running option had a respectable stat line. So I think that it will be interesting to see how those guys work things in. And I think that it's going to really help propel Michigan into the future, because I think that the running back room is what's going to be the most important thing. Quarterback is, but I think as far as what they're able to do, what these guys are able to create for themselves, and what these guys are able to just somewhat accomplish up front, yeah, it's going to be dependent on both the quarterback and the offensive line. But if when you look at what Chip Lindsey's had, you look at Omarion Hampton, multiple 1,000+ yard seasons, almost like 2,000. I think that, or really it was 1,500, but nonetheless, I'm hyperbole here. I think that that's really going to bode well for what the future of the offense is. But they're not the only ones. There's other guys that are going to get into the mix. Here on the other end, we're going to talk about the rest of the guys who are already on the roster. And then in segment 3, we're going to talk about the freshmen and what Jasper Parker and Donovan Johnson bring to the table, and where I think their career trajectory can go. So we will get to that here in just a moment. But before we do, attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's a memory I'll never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create these unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. Filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters most, being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for an upcoming playoff game, and it couldn't have been easier. I found the super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer, no surprise fees at checkout, plus knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, the more we talk, the voice is still a little weak, but I mean, I feel worlds better in so many ways than what I did for the last 2 weeks. Pretty tired of being sick. I know a lot of you're always sick. Like, I don't know that. I mean, not usually with cold flu types of things, but you get a stomach bug of some sort. There's or injuries, lots of injuries. I am more injured than sick more often than not. I throw my back out. Used to throw it out like once a month. But nonetheless, feel a heck of a lot better today than I have the last 2 weeks. So I'm excited about that. So we mentioned those two. What about Ben Hall? How does he figure in? I mean, I think he's the obvious number 3 back, and he's the guy who started out the gates for Michigan in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Alabama. We've seen some really good plays from him when he's been called upon, but it's been kind of more spring game. We haven't necessarily seen a ton of it in season. But 2 years of spring game, I feel like, I mean, obviously he burst on the scene and as a freshman in the spring game, and suddenly it was like, oh, he's a 3-star that no one wanted. Well, now we've all changed our tune. So it'll be interesting to see where Ben Hall, who's just got the lowest center of gravity ever, but didn't necessarily have a ton of success, if they're able to use him in some more, fullback type packages, short yardage. Like he could be that Khalid Hill type, especially, when you've got a guy like Max Bredesen playing ahead of you. I think that could really make things very interesting. But year 3, obviously at this point, he's going to really have to show out in camp to really solidify himself as that third back, because Justice Haynes didn't transfer in for no reason. And we saw Jordan Marshall really come on strong when he was absolutely necessary, needed, and called upon. So that, I think, is where Ben Hall, he's got an opportunity to shine, but he's going to have to really work for it, because there's just a lot of bodies now in this room that have a lot of potential. Now, this isn't necessarily a room where you look at and say, well, those are just a bunch of 5-stars. Obviously, Michigan wants to build towards that. That's why they're going after guys like Savion Hyder, Javion Osborne. But I think that, Jordan Marshall obviously is a high caliber guy. And then, I mean, they do have a 5-star in Justice Haynes, who was at one point a 5-star. But behind them, it's kind of like just the guys that kind of meet the eye for Michigan type of perspective. So while we talk about talk about Ben Hall, and he's kind of like that perfect Michigan type guy, could really be that Hassan Haskins type. Obviously, they've got another, like what Blake Corum was thought to be, right? Which was just like, he's a one cut and go guy. Blake ended up being a heck of a lot more than that. But certainly, if you remember back to 2020, 2021, there wasn't really much thought of him doing the little, a little wiggle, a little razzle dazzle, to kind of cut through all of the mess in the middle of the field. He was thought to be more of like a guy that once he hits the hole, he's gone. And that is what I think Micah Kapana can be. He's got a lot of speed. And I really trust, I think this is one of the things, and we'll talk about this with Donovan Johnson as well. I have a lot of more trust than I think a lot of others do, just simply based off the fact that where he went to high school. When you're a top running back for a high school like Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, that's one of those like 5 schools that you can kind of point to across the country as far as high schools and say, like, let's expand it to 10, because there's probably more than that. But I look at IMG Academy. I look at Mater Dei in Orange County, California. You look at a Bergen Catholic in Oradell, New Jersey. You look at to some degree DeSoto in Texas, maybe a little bit less, but I mean that tends to be a pretty big high school. But like, there's those foundational ones. There, as far as like from a country standpoint, regionally, obviously we look at Belleville and we look at Cass Tech and we look at King, and sometimes Saline, sometimes some other schools around. But you always kind of have a feeling of what one of those schools is going to be. Bishop Gorman is one of those national powerhouse schools, right? I could have added in American Heritage or any number of schools in southern Florida, St. Thomas Aquinas, Madonna Chaminade. But when I look at where Micah Kapana came from and the fact that he was so good at Bishop Gorman, that should be like sign number one, right? Like you might just kind of like looking at college football, right? You can look at college football as in general, and you can sit there and say like, well, I don't know how that guy's going to do in the NFL. But if he's the starting running back at Michigan, he's probably pretty good. It's kind of that same thing. Now you have to see it translate same way that it goes from college to NFL. But he's obviously a little bit smaller, a little bit shiftier. And I think he's got a ton of speed. So I'm really excited to see what he is able to do and capable of doing. The funny thing about the running backs room is, as much as I'm sitting here thinking like, we're going to talk about the freshmen later, it's like we've already run through almost everybody because there's only 6 guys. So let's go ahead and get to the freshmen now. And then we'll just we'll kind of talk a little bit more about the offense in general from there. I think that's probably our best course of action. So then you've got the other 2 who haven't been around. Like, I'm not going to get into Henry Donahue or any of those guys. And certainly some of them could play, right? But I think that I think you should be very excited about who Michigan did get in 2025 in terms of their 2 freshmen. So let's start with Donovan Johnson, who at one time was on a 5-star trajectory before tearing his ACL. I've heard some mixed things about his capability, but again, the Bishop Gorman standard applies here because he was at IMG Academy. And certainly, I don't think that this last year went exactly how he wanted it to go. It's not anywhere comparable to what he looked like as a sophomore, but he certainly was a guy that everybody wanted at one point. And ends up finishing as a 3-star. Was a 4-star at the time he committed, certainly kind of fell off. But this is where strength and conditioning can really help. Unfortunately, I don't believe he's an early enrollee, so he's going to take some time. It's going to be a little while before we get to see what Donovan Johnson can do. And the good news is you've got, I just mentioned 4 guys who are ahead of him at the very least. So with that in mind, it's kind of like, okay, you don't necessarily need to count on him. You can build him up for the next 3 years. You can get his speed back. You can get his strength back. You can get all the things that you want to get out of him. And I think this is where you have a lot of trust for what Tony Alford's been able to do. Obviously, too, building the offensive line is going to help him out immensely as well. But I think Donovan Johnson, I think he's got a ton of potential. He's a big body guy, having seen him around in person as he comes for visits and everything. But there is a little bit of a question mark because he comes back from injury and he's still not quite the same. And I think that the scouts and the recruiting services see that. Now, the guy that I think is going to be a fan favorite by the time he leaves is Jasper Parker. Like, no matter what they get, right? Like, they're going to get that, I'm not going to say they're going to get. They're in really good shape for both Savion Hyder and Javion Osborne and that other running back out of, I think, Florida, who might usurp one of them. I mean, Savion Hyder, I think, is top on Michigan's board, so I don't think he's going anywhere. But nonetheless, Jasper Parker, I think, is going to, and I always hate saying this, he's going to be a fan favorite. So I always harken back. For some reason, it's like almost like I feel like 97.1, the ticket, used to almost like play this constantly. But I can hear the inflection and everything when Doug Karsh, who's now a good friend of mine, or at least a good acquaintance of mine, rather, him talking about Dontrell Willis. Like, I think he's going to be a fan favorite. Well, it didn't work out that way. I agreed with him at the time, though. He was the one that everyone was excited about more than Miguel Cabrera in a lot of ways at the time of that trade. But I do think that Jasper Parker is going to be a fan favorite. When I talk to people inside of Michigan, they rave about him. They feel like they got a complete under the radar guy from Archbishop Shaw, Marrero, Louisiana, which is the same high school as Ron Bellamy. And you see what he's able to do in the postseason. He's got that breakaway speed. He's got a little bit of that shiftiness. And on top of it, he is the type of dude that is like a quintessential fit for Michigan. The way, like, when I talk to people inside of Michigan about what Jasper Parker, who he is, it's like they're like literally like, we don't want to scare him off in any way, right? Like, it's almost like that type of mentality because it's like we almost feel like he's too good to be true. Like, he's everything that we want. We don't want it, like when we are having recruiting weekends, we want to make sure that Jasper Parker is taken care of. So that's kind of the impression that I get, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do when he gets to Ann Arbor. So let's talk a little run pass, right? Because it's a little bit of both things. So we're going to tie it into the quarterback position, and we're going to do that here in just a moment. I wonder if ever since my voice started becoming an issue, it kind of feels like I'm talking 1,000 times faster. I wonder if that's why I'm burning through the things that I have on either in my notes or in my head so fast, so fast, unbelievable. So when I look at this year, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what's going to come because we don't know exactly. We look at the running backs and you know who the top two are right now. You just don't know necessarily the order, but you assume it's going to be Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall. Looking at my list, I have them both rated high, and then I've got Ben Hall as medium high. So you have that, but we don't know exactly, who's going to be the day one starter. I think it's fair to say Mikey Keene will probably be that as far as the quarterback position is concerned. I already kind of touched on this idea, but I think it is crucial to be able to have Bryce Underwood to be able to come in relatively early, even if it is just like, working him in for a series. I'd love to see him not just come in for a play, but like a series here and there and throw the ball deep to back those linebackers off the line a little bit. And granted, like you put Mikey Keene back in, they might creep back up. But that's the thing is when you've got a guy that can hit some deep balls and has the type of accuracy that he has, and Mikey Keene is also very accurate, but I don't think he's throwing as deep downfield. I think the way that you can kind of look at the way the Michigan offense changed in a lot of ways, it goes from 2021 where it really was the running backs kind of carrying the load. I mean, Cade could hit some deep throws, right? Like he wasn't hitting a ton, but you saw some here and there. And obviously you saw JJ do it as well when he came in, again, irregularly. Like I can think of his first pass play, the other touchdown against Wisconsin, both to Dalen Baldwin. You think about some of it, I was about to say the pass to Roman Wilson, but that came from Donovan Edwards in the Big Ten championship game. I think that you think where it was like an intermittent scenario there, and it really was kind of the running backs making a lot of things work for them, because, it wasn't Cade that was, even though he had the big throw to Eric All, really what iced that game. I mean, that's what got Michigan back in the lead. But then what iced that game was Hassan Haskins making something out of nothing in a lot of ways. I think the running backs are certainly, when it's Mikey Keene, they're going to have to do that. So you can almost have a mix, because I just think that Bryce Underwood is so much further along than JJ was in his development. I think that you can have a little bit of that 2022. I hearkened back to that Hawaii game, and just the sudden recognition by the Rainbow Warriors as soon as everybody sucked up to try to stop the run, and JJ goes over the top for Roman Wilson for that deep touchdown, and it just took the doors off, right? And then suddenly everyone had to play Michigan even. That's kind of the point of this of the previous offense. We'll see what Chip Lindsey does, right? Because that was the point of the previous offense, was try to create. Still got a cough. Try to create a situation where the running backs aren't running into loaded boxes. Now in 2023, they just did, which was kind of funny, because JJ, they were like, well, we're going to dare JJ to beat us. And JJ was like, okay, much obliged. And the running back still got theirs, and JJ didn't exactly have the most gaudy numbers in the world. But then you look, and he just carved, defenses up. Really the first 2 weeks of the season, a little struggly in week 3. You get to that Nebraska game that was week 5, I believe. And it was just like, you can't stop this. I think this is going to be a little bit different, but just because it's going to be quarterback driven in that sense, more so than wide receivers, because Michigan doesn't necessarily have any wide receivers that strike the fear of into them, right? But that's where the running backs can play a big role in the passing game as well, right? Just to be able to be that check down, or to be a guy that cuts out and gets the ball in the flat, or takes a screen and does something like that. I mean, that's the same as a run play in a lot of ways. Just to be able to see some of these guys create, I think it's going to be really crucial for what this offense can do. So I'm excited, because I think that while we look at the defense and everything that the defense brings to the table, I think the offense has a lot that can really be going for it. And it's kind of funny, because 2020, it wasn't that the offense wasn't good, but it had its moments. You look at that Minnesota game, it was like, okay, that's everything that you thought this offense could look like. But there were just too many mistakes and too much inconsistency. And that's why you end up with a Cade McNamara-led 2021 team. This is a little bit different in that, the floor is so low, and people are like, you become afraid that it's become Iowa, that you're just going to have to rely on this idea that Michigan's offense can do next to nothing. Well, it's one of the worst offensive units in the country this past year. And the last several years, it's been an upper third offense. And keep in mind, 2021 with Cade McNamara was the most explosive, essentially the most explosive offense in the country in terms of 50+ yard plays. I don't know that they have those playmakers for sure. We'll see if they're able to lure a Skylar Bell back to the portal after spring, once he's completed his academic requirements. They have a Donovan McCulley, or even a second year version as far as receiver goes of a Kendrick Bell, a healthy Amarion Walker. I know we're not even talking about the wide receivers. We'll get to them at a later date. Freshman Andrew Marsh. There's Anthony Simpson transfers in. There's a lot where you're like, okay, maybe some of these things can end up really working, and we just haven't seen it yet. But I think that a lot of it's going to be centered on the ability of Michigan to be able to run the ball, because certainly other teams are going to defensively say, well, we know you can run. We're going to try to stop the run. We're going to dare you to pass. So the fact that Michigan's going to have to find a way to make things work. Now, if they can just run the ball at will regardless, then it's just going to be game over, especially with the defense that Michigan has. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back on Monday. We'll talk to you then. Peace.